Thank you for watching the CEO Barbecue. My name is Antonio, and today I'll be looking for copper and gold, but mostly copper in Kazakhstan, of all places. And I'll be joined by Simon Cooper, the CEO of Pallas Resources. Before we get into it, though, I would like to warn you that we have not received monetary compensation for the production of this video from the company that's being interviewed. Please understand that this channel is a business that sells content producing services to companies, which means you cannot rely on this video for research and you should treat this as an advertisement instead. Please only watch this if you know what you're doing. This interview is intended only for experienced junior mining speculators because mineral exploration, development, and mining is a very tough business where failure is the norm. This is going to be a conversation that is general and impersonal in nature, containing forward-looking statements. I am not a licensed financial advisor, so before continuing on, please talk to an investment advisor with a good long-term track record because your capital is at risk, and I am neither a licensed financial advisor nor do I have a good long-term track record. If you're not 100% sure you understand 100% of the disclaimers I just showed you and told you about, please go to the last section of this video and do not consume this content unless you fully understand and agree with everything said therein. That all said, Pallas is not listed anywhere because it's actually a private company. So normally I'd give you the trading data here, but I don't have it yet. However, I do see close to 27 million shares outstanding, as well as 2.3 million options. And as far as I know, their current capital raise is happening at £1, which would value the company at 27 British pound market cap, if you can call it that, fully diluted close to 30 million British pounds. And that's about 50 million Arctic pesos, also known as Canadian dollars. I do see a decent shareholders breakdown, which shows me that the two co-founders of the company, now respectively the CEO and the president of the company, they own a combined 30% of it. And there's a couple of other recognizable names, including Rick Roll, the man, the myth, the legend himself. He owns over 5.5% of the company. And a couple of other names that you can probably see on your screen right now that you would recognize. Again, this is a private company, so I don't have access to their financials either, which means that I won't be able to provide your typical exploration to G&A ratio or the drilling to marketing ratio here that I typically do. But hopefully Simon will be able to provide some insight into how much money they spend and how they manage the company later on in the conversation. So in a nutshell, Pallas is looking for, again, copper, specifically tier 1 copper and gold, but again, mostly copper systems across the country of Kazakhstan. And I really do mean it because they have one of the largest land positions that I've ever seen at over 16,000 square kilometers of ground. And they're now moving from a period of which they were building that land position, of course, acquiring data, analyzing data. So they're moving from that stage of the company into its first drill phase. And that's going to be across multiple projects and with multiple partners too, including Ivanhoe Mines and First Quantum. They're also part of the BHP Explorer program. Again, I'm not doing too much of an overview here, but they're essentially looking for 3 types of deposits. That being your sediment-hosted copper deposits in the south-central part of the country that kind of extends into the central part of the country. That's what got Ivanhoe interested. We'll talk about that at length and in depth. They're looking for orogenic and gold deposits in the north-central part of the country. And then they're most importantly, for my personal taste at least, they're looking for copper porphyries in the eastern part of the country. On top of that, there's some optionality here as well. There's Kulan Resources. It's a separate company which Pallas owns 2/3 of, so 66% of it. It's a lithium and a rare earths exploration company. There's no drilling to date, but hopefully we get an update on that as well towards the latter part of the conversation. And then there's also Altai, which they own a little more than half of, 55% to be specific. Also no drilling yet, but the thesis here is magmatic nickel copper exploration analogous to Norilsk. Of course, none of this is without its challenges and risks. This is early stage exploration that we're talking about, and success depends on whether their data-driven exploration approach can convert into economic discoveries here, which they think, again, is a question we'll get an answer to within the next 24 months, because now is really when the show starts. And I'm hoping to get some more answers in the next 90 or so minutes here, but which means that I better shut up already, Simon, and let you do the talking. But first of all, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to share the story with your audience.
Pleasure's all mine, of course, and thank you for doing this on such short notice. And I really am looking forward to the conversation, although I am biased because I have money invested in Kazakhstan myself, but also because it seems like, you know, kind of decades of not much happening in the country there, and then the last 5 or so years have really changed the country politically as well as economically. And now also from an exploration perspective, things are really moving along. So we have loads to go through here today, but this is still the CEO barbecue, as I said. So we'll have to go through a couple of obligatory questions. The smell test here first, starting off with the man behind the company, or one of them at least. Who are you, and why do you think you're the right man for the job?
Well, look, appreciate the overview, and you've kind of run me on that a bit. But as you said, I am one of the founders of Pallas and its CEO. My background by trade, I'm a geologist and a mining engineer. I started off my career up and down, working up and down the east coast of Australia. So predominantly exploration roles in both base metals and coal, before heading over to the UK, doing a master's in mining engineering at Camborne School of Mines, and then heading into a role in Central Africa. So there I worked with Glencore on one of their major copper producing mines. At the time, I believe it was also the largest cobalt producer in the world. And that was my first foray into sediment hosted copper systems. And really from there, kind of I've learned to kind of really love, the beauty of those systems, and have a real affinity for, how prospective those targets and those deposit styles can be. Post working in the Congo, I actually then had my first foray into Central Asia. So went and worked for a small London listed group called Tengri Resources that had a couple of resource stage porphyry projects in Kyrgyzstan. So I went and lived and worked and explored in Kyrgyzstan. And really, I was kind of responsible there for running an internal scoping study. We were continuing to kind of drill out those projects, do resource delineation and definition drilling there. Ultimately, they were marginal in nature and didn't really sort of warrant advancing. So we kind of worked ourselves out of a job in that respect. And from there, I went to work for a royalty company, which at the time was very much a startup. It was a private business. It had four royalties. I was employee number two or number three, so very, very early into that. And from there, we kind of grew it from having four royalties to having well north of 60 now, generating some pretty meaningful revenue. We took it from a private vehicle into a listed entity that was listed initially on the TSX Venture, graduated to the TSX main board, and then ultimately cross-listed that or dual-listed that onto the NASDAQ as well. Before coming back to Central Asia, coming back to kind of the real love, which is exploration and hopefully discovery, and founding Pallas alongside my co-founder and building the team from there.
How old are you again?
I'm 38.
So you've got
38.
about 10 years on me, which means that I really have to lock in if I want to do something, because you're kind of I still make YouTube videos for a living here, so you're kind of putting me to shame. I often look for a specific experience in the task at hand, and language is part of it, of course. So do you or any of your team members speak Kazakh or Russian?
We speak pretty horrific Russian, so the short answer there is no. We're fortunate in that our team in country is firstly incredibly skilled in their own specific niches and skill sets, but also bilingual. So Kazakhstan has again, we've got a highly educated young workforce that we can tap into. And thankfully as well, that kind of crosses into, both our team having sort of like English, Russian, Kazakh language capabilities. Yeah.
Oh, so you say you have an in-country team. How senior are those people? Like, do any executives or any from your senior team reside in country?
No, so at a corporate level, there are two of us. So two of us that co-founded the company, myself and Daniel Rickerman, who's another Australian geologist. He, oddly enough, is based in Beijing, and he's really the brains behind the generative work that we do, the targeting, our operations. He's in country, or he's just come back from a trip there like 2 days ago. He's there 6 or 7 times a year. But for the most part, our senior management team is based in Kazakhstan. They're all, Kazakh nationals. And again, we've built out a team that's, very much fit for purpose when it comes to both exploration. So obviously a very strong geology and technical team, but likewise subsoil. So, licensing, permitting, and the regulatory environment. Likewise, we have council, we have an ecologist, we have obviously sort of G&A in our back office team also in country as well to really manage the show from there.
You also talked about, so you personally have specific experience for sedimentary copper deposits. What about the rest of your team? Because you're essentially dealing with three large buckets of geology types, if you will, that we'll talk about here in depth. But has the rest of your team successfully worked on these type of geologies before?
Yeah, so again, my background, I've sort of had that foray into said copper and
Mhm.
porphyry systems, I guess, starting with the rest of the team. And again, really, Daniel being sort of the other co-founder of Pallas. Again, he drives the generative and the technical side of the equation with what we do within Pallas. So he's a geologist by trade, got an undergrad and a master's degree in geology and mineral exploration. Again, he's worked across Australia, but predominantly now Asia and Central Asia. So really the common theme between both of us and why we came together to start Pallas was that we lived and worked, explored in different parts in Central Asia. So for him specifically, he's worked across Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Western China.
Mhm.
With a previous hat on, he was part of the first gold discovery in Kyrgyzstan, so south of where we are in Kazakhstan. The first gold discovery in Kyrgyzstan since that country's independence. So post the dissolution of the Soviet Union, post 1991, the first gold discovery in Kyrgyzstan, and what was actually the first Karlan-style gold discovery in Central Asia in general. Beyond that, he's worked in both epithermal and porphyry gold systems. There's not a huge amount of expertise in sediment-hosted copper systems within Kazakhstan because realistically, no one's done any work there for 60 years. So I would argue that through the Pallas hat and over the last 7 years that, since we started the company, he's built up some very real expertise in said copper systems as well. Outside of that, we've built I guess, a pretty heavy hitting technical advisory team that is there to bring specific niche skill sets to the table in the deposit styles that we're going after. So I don't want to just put them in niche buckets because each of these advisors has a much broader mandate and much bigger skill sets. But Dave Selly is a legend in the sediment hosted copper space. He's done a lot of work with Ivanhoe. There's quite a lot of overlap there, which is exciting. A huge amount of work in the Central African copper belt. And we've been working with him substantially on our data sets and building out a massive 3D model within the said copper setting that we're in at the moment. Um, David Groves is another technical advisor, quite literally wrote the book on orogenic gold systems, was a massive part of the targeting that we did there. And then we have John Woodhead, again, huge amount of expertise in porphyry and said copper systems, and Tom Woolrich that does a little bit of everything, has helped us with, data collection, machine learning, porphyry targeting. So again, we recognize that we can't and don't and won't know everything. And, we're always trying to look for good people to call us out on our targeting and really kind of challenge the assumptions that we're making because the goal here is to go and make discoveries.
The Aussie German ginger geo alpha generating machine. I like it.
You said
Um,
it, not me. You said it, not me.
Insider ownership, as I mentioned earlier, is noted at 30%. That's held by the two founders. Essentially, you've got half of that, so a total 50% yourself. Is that all? How did that come to be? Is that founder shares, or do you also participate in financings yourself?
So Daniel and I, when we started the company back in 2018, we funded it ourselves effectively for the first 4 years. So, it was 50-50 ownership when we first founded the company. We put capital in there to effectively get us through that startup phase. Really, the first couple of years of Pallas was focused on building out our massive data sets and then using that to start to underpin the generative and the targeting work that we did at quite literally a country scale. So we funded it ourselves from 2018 through 2021 when we completed our first seed round. And then, the 15% ownership that you see, so he owns 15%, I own 15%, all of that is shares that we've purchased, whether it's through that founding round or follow-on rounds as well. And yes, we've participated in each round that we've done as a private group.
So you're buying into this current financing round then as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we
Okay.
have for each of the three prior private rounds we've done.
How important is Pallas to you right now from a kind of a personal perspective, if you will? Um, I'm trying to figure out how aligned are you really? Do you have any other commitments that you do? Do you have another job essentially? Is there anything else that you're doing outside of this? And again, how important is this investment to you personally?
Pallas is it. I live, breathe, wake up, sleep Pallas. And look from I guess, in terms of what does it mean to me financially? It's pretty significant. It's probably you know, 70, 75%, 80% of my entire portfolio and net worth, including real estate. So it's a huge chunk of what we do. And, we don't pay ourselves a huge amount because, the goal here is to have to run lean, to get money into the ground, to kind of keep that share structure tight as best we can. And we're both here with the view that if we pull this off and do make a discovery, that inside ownership that we have is really the thing that kind of drives us and wakes us up in the morning.
70 to 75% of your net worth in an early stage exploration company, a man of risk. I see. I like it.
We're in the ultra high risk, ultra high reward end of the spectrum, right? We try to do everything to kind of protect against the downside, and give ourselves as much exposure to that upside. But let's face it, exploration is a risky business. So yes, there is a high risk tolerance from both of us.
I'm sure you'll tell me more about the history of the asset here in a minute when we get to it, and how it all came to be. But from the perspective of royalties, do you or any of your colleagues or your co-founder, does anyone personally own a royalty on any of these projects?
No founders, no management, no insiders own royalties. And in fact, we don't have royalties over any of our projects. We're starting to generate and incubate royalties by way of the joint venture partnerships that we have, but otherwise there are no royalties on our projects at all.
The government doesn't get a royalty either.
The government has a royalty once it kicks into production. So it's actually called a mineral extraction tax, which is kind of akin to a royalty. So they have those rights once it gets into production. But we're obviously not at that stage.
Well, talking about incentives and really the part of this interview that I call the smell test is really figuring out about what your incentives are. How is because you're a private company, and I suppose you can choose whether to share this or not, but how is executive compensation structured and determined? Like, are your KPIs tied to? I know with public companies, they're sometimes tied to share price discovery and stuff, to share price and stuff like that. But with you, is it tied to discovery success or something else?
We pay ourselves a base salary, and that is effectively it. We've never paid a bonus. We've never, we don't have performance incentive. Let's put it that way. We own 15% of the company each, right? It's a meaningful enough stake. That's not to say that we don't look to, and probably will look to put in place some, more formal remuneration plans going forward. But again, the 15% that we own, we have purchased. Outside of that, we have 2.3 million options, which have been granted. The vast bulk of those have been used as a remuneration tool for our advisory panel, whether it be the corporate and commercial guys or the technical bench that we have there. Daniel and I, for the first time ever last year, I think, have 300,000 options each. So in the course of 7 years, we have 300,000 options at the time, of, not valued at a huge amount. So that is it in terms of comp. We pay ourselves a base salary. It's substantially less than what we would get in the market and have been paid in previous roles by probably a factor of, about a half of what we would otherwise get. But again, that's fine because it allows us getting the capital into the ground to go and make discoveries. So we do run very, very lean at a corporate level.
Tom Woolrich doesn't get paid, does he?
Tom only has ownership by way of the options that he has in the company, and he has also participated in various funding rounds that we have done. So, he's remunerated through those options, and then likewise, he's actually put his own capital to work in the company as well.
I was actually just half kidding here. I'd be happy for him to get paid, of course, and shout out to him again because he introduced us. So this wouldn't have been happening if it wasn't for him. What is your G&A like relative to? I'm just wondering and again, share it or don't share it. It's up to you because you don't have to because you're not a public company. But I'm just wondering relative to a public company, how much money are you saving by not being public, essentially?
So our G&A at a corporate level is probably in the vicinity of 250,000 to maybe 300,000 pounds at the upper end of the spectrum. Yeah, it's pretty de minimis. We for the most part, I think on a G&A to kind of capital into the ground ratio, we're probably at 80%, goes into the ground, 20% on kind of G&A and corporate overheads. And then that's actually supercharged because if you look at the spend that comes in by way of the joint venture partnerships, that ratio would drop down pretty substantially. I'm not an accountant by trade, so I'm not sure if I'm allowed to kind of make that ratio, but it would probably be like 5% G&A to 95% capital that goes into the ground if you include the JV spend that's coming in over the next few years.
you probably don't have to spend anything on marketing, or well, or do you? Like, do you go to conferences? Do you do anything in terms of marketing? Do you have to?
So specific marketing, the short answer is I'm not sure that we've ever spent a dollar. If you go on Google Pallas and look at, what's out there in terms of YouTube videos or like paid marketing or advertising, there's effectively none. Um, we attend, conferences here and there, like, PDAC, but really actually the goal there is to get in front of prospective joint venture partners, existing joint venture partners, existing investors. Certainly, there is an element there as well in terms of getting in front of potentially new shareholders. So I guess you could kind of class that as marketing. But otherwise, we don't have a marketing budget.
Wait, is this your first long format interview for Pallas?
It is. It absolutely is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I should turn up the heat then in that case. I should set the standard higher for if there's something to come. Well, is it? Oh, is the plan to remain private until a certain point? Do you eventually want to take it public? Are you? And that's something we can talk about actually, because I've been interested in the public versus private um, way of doing mineral exploration. I have a personal belief, not that anyone should care, but I have a personal belief that most public companies should not be, well, they shouldn't exist in the first place, but most of them shouldn't be public to begin with. So, are you getting pressure from any of your existing shareholders to list so that there's liquidity, and do you plan on listing anytime soon?
So just to kind of set the context as to why we're private at the moment, it's not because
Yeah.
we have an aversion to the public markets, but we are private at the moment by design in that it removes the overheads associated with being, a publicly listed vehicle. It removes the volatility and it removes the distractions. My job is not to go out and focus 24/7 on marketing. My job is to focus on work streams that hopefully will add significantly more value than that. So again, really the goal for us as a business is to be heads down, focused on making a discovery. I'd argue at that point in time, when you have the sniffs of a discovery or when you have a discovery under your belt, that is the most explosive part of the Lassonde curve. That's when the eye-watering value kind of gets created. And it's also when the capital markets get behind your story. So for us, it's working towards those catalysts to then kind of sit back and say, all right, let's look at how we crystallize value here, by way of an IPO or a listing or a backdoor listing, whatever it may be. So again, it's kind of getting public, but doing so at the right point in time. And when we do go public, obviously we want to hit it hard in that respect. We may keep elements of our portfolio private for longer. And the reason that I say that is, some of our interests, so some of our joint venture interests, be it royalties or the carried equity stakes that we have, are fully carried, fully funded, revenue generating. And, now particularly with our Ivanhoe and First Quantum deal collectively, cover almost the entirety of the best chunks of entire basins that are globally, significant basins. And so I'm not entirely sure that the public markets will properly value those. And because we don't necessarily have to list them, they generate revenue for us, right? And again, fully carried, fully funded. So we may opt to keep those private for longer just to incubate the value there. Royalties are incredibly valuable instruments. And again, if you can have a royalty over an entire copper basin, we want to make sure that we don't dilute that too soon and let that kind of create full value in and of itself.
Hmm. What do you, I kind of threw my inexperienced and uneducated opinion out there talking about public versus private. What do you think about doing it privately the way you've done it so far? If you could go back and do it differently, would you do it differently? Would you be an early stage public exploration company?
No, I don't think we would have changed a thing. I'm not going to sit here and say that it has been, certainly through the early rounds, that it was easy to raise capital as a private company. It absolutely was not. It was very, very difficult. And, I'm not going to sort of be the advocate to say like there should be more companies that are private, but I would say is that I think it's a much higher bar to raise capital as a private company. And I think you have to be doing very real exploration. You have to be going after big targets, big concepts, geology. You have to be in geology that, has that potential to unlock those kind of tier one systems and settings. Because I think if you're not that, the capital is probably not there as a private co. Again, I think we're kind of now on the precipice of where it starts to make a bit more sense to consider a listing. And the reason that I say that is, we're maturing to the point where the rubber's starting to hit the road this year. I'm sure we can kind of touch on it later, but this year we'll drill for the first time in earnest. We'll do 21,000 meters across 7 projects. So again, I think that's the stage that the capital markets wake up to start to get excited about exploration when you're doing that grassroots and very early stage, reconnaissance and geophysics, moving towards drill targets. It's probably harder to get the capital markets excited about that.
Well, I do want to talk about that, and I want to talk about money essentially, and specifically how you plan on making some of it, especially given the size of the land package and the number of different moving particles, which again includes the partnerships, your own money, big land positions, the spin outs, and the royalty, and so on and so forth. So, what is the too big of a question potentially? But what's the business plan here? What's the business goal?
The business plan is to make discoveries, significant discoveries. So things that can stack up on the world stage, things that in a world where, over the last 2 decades, discoveries have fallen off a cliff, and certainly like world-class discoveries have fallen off a cliff. We want to fill that gap. We want to be part of, fixing that problem, and finding things that frankly get taken out at ridiculous premiums because there is such a scarcity of those new world-class discoveries. How do we do that? How do we execute on that? In my head and in Daniel's head, it's always been we want exposure to a big portfolio of projects over belts and basins that have tier one existing endowment, where you've had a 50 or 60 year gap in terms of modern exploration, and where, in our eyes, arguably there's a huge amount of remaining prospectivity. So that is Kazakhstan through and through. And how do we actually execute on making sure that the portfolio that we have right now, which, as you said, is 16,000 square kilometers. It's a huge, huge package. How do we make sure the right capital goes into that to advance those projects? Because we are not here to build an empire. We're here to test the potential of those projects. And if that thesis that we are testing doesn't play out, we will and have build and turn over projects. But it's through a three-pronged or three-tiered strategy. So we have our own wholly owned projects, which we obviously own on a 100% basis. We have 9 of those. We raise capital into, Pallas at a topco to advance those. So we always want to make sure that we have a treasury to move those projects forward. And we'll be drilling 4 of the 9 of those this year, the other 5 at earlier stage, and we're, moving them up the chain. We then have our joint venture partnerships. So again, we have the privilege of being able to bring, both Ivanhoe Mines and First Quantum into Kazakhstan, and bringing their deep-seated expertise into the different projects that we have as well. And under those joint venture partnerships, they are fully funded, fully free carried, right the way from staking through to production. We get, royalties. We have a carried equity interest along the way. And then even at the point in time where a decision to mine is made, we can take a loan into production. So again, really from here on out, they take care of themselves from a funding standpoint. And then the third tier is our portfolio companies. So Pallas has a very distinct copper gold focus, but by way of the data sets that we have, there's opportunities that we've looked at and said, that's way too good not to jump on. But we can't do everything, right? We have to be disciplined. We have a large enough portfolio as is. Hence, we've created these subsidiaries, which we call portfolio companies, with a tiny amount of Pallas capital. So collectively across our portfolio codes, there's been about 75,000 pounds that's gone into incubating those. We have since then spun them out, raised capital into them separately. But Pallas shareholders still get a pretty significant exposure to the portfolio codes in that we're still majority shareholders of each of them as it currently stands. So that's kind of the three-pronged approach.
You don't have to run those 2 companies, right? I mean, they have their own management teams and so on.
No, so in both cases, we still run Altai and
Okay.
Kulan. Altai being magmatic nickel copper sulfides, Kulan being hard rock lithium. We still run them. So it wasn't the case that we spun these out to try to increase G&A. That was never the goal. It was, again, to kind of jump on opportunities that we couldn't have otherwise jumped on. At a certain point in time, and we're getting pretty close to this now within Altai, we will build a team out specifically for that. So we're still trying to keep it very, very lean. Obviously utilize the existing function and capabilities that we have in Kazakhstan as it stands right now to advance those. But again, at the right point in time, we will build a specific purpose-built team to move those forward. And for Altai, we're getting pretty close to that.
I hope we'll have some time to touch upon those kind of toward the end of the conversation. But how are you able to get 16,000 square kilometers there in the first place? Which, but by the way, 16,000 square kilometers is about half the size of the country that I'm in right now. But if it's a lot, and if it's that good
Yep.
as you hope it is in that perspective, how come nobody beat you to it?
We were one of the first groups into country post 2018, where Kazakhstan changed its code to mimic Western Australian legislation. So it's had a very long history of being a resource-rich and producing country, both in the metals and mining space, but really importantly as well in the hydrocarbon space. So I think Kazakhstan stands out as the crown jewel of Central Asia in my eyes because it has that very stable investment environment that was driven by way of big US interests coming in and investing in the oil and gas side of the equation. So just for reference point, Chevron are in there with like a $40+ billion project in the west of the country. Likewise, Glencore and Rio have been in Kazakhstan for 20 years, for a long time, as Western groups obviously exploring and producing. But again, that 2018 change in the mining code was a key catalyst that not only modernized the legislation to look and feel like Western Australia, but really importantly, opened the country up to groups like ourselves to come and stake ground on a 100% owned basis under this modern licensing system. And what happened was post 2018, different chunks of the company opened up and came onto what was called a first come, first served system, where if you lodge an application first, if you're first in line, the Ministry of the Kazakh regulators have 10 business days to give you a yes or no to that application. Provided you meet the technical merits of that application, the license is yours. So, by way of us being in very, very early and being sort of one of the groups, certainly at scale when in acquired ground, it really was just that first mover advantage that allowed us to go and, own and, own it or stake and effectively own like good chunks of entire belts and basins and have such a massive portfolio that we built up.
Well, what is it? Three rules: be smart, be smart, cheat, or be first. And you didn't want to cheat, so you went first. I guess that makes sense. If you
Yeah.
and again, it's a lot going on. If you had to drop everything that you have right now, besides just one project, and go all in on it, which one would it be?
That would be painful. But look, the flagship for us, as it stands, is our sediment-hosted copper portfolio. And there is a few reasons for that. So that is what it's within a basin called the Chu-Sarysu Basin. We quite literally started the company because of this basin. And the reason that we did that is because it's a globally significant copper basin. So it's the third largest sediment-hosted copper basin in the world. The key differentiator between what we have in central Kazakhstan and Central Africa, which is number one, and the Kupferschiefer, which is in your neck of the woods, in Europe, which is number two, is that unlike those top two said copper basins, those top two are very, very busy. You're not getting ground there unless it turns over. And they've also been systematically very well explored for well over 100 years. So, you could argue that they're mature terrain. Unlike that, unlike Kazakhstan, which is the complete opposite end of the spectrum. So you have a huge amount of existing endowment within the Kazakh basin, but you've got 60 years where there's been no grassroots or greenfields work done there. Alongside that, up until recently, it was wide open for staking. We've now staked the entirety of that, or at least the most prospective chunks of what is available within that basin. Beyond that, we have two of the world's, I would argue, two groups that bring a phenomenal pedigree in said hosted copper systems as partners in that basin. And then we also have a huge amount of capital that goes into that over the course of the next 6 years. So with Ivanhoe alone, we'll have up to $135 million US
Mhm.
going into just the alliance that we have with Ivanhoe. We then have two projects outside of that, which we wholly own, both of which will drill this year, and two projects with First Quantum, one of which will be drilling. So again, not to downgrade the rest of our portfolio because I love the porphyry copper potential. I love the orogenic gold, and the themes broadly play out within those two, right? Lots of potential, lots of existing endowment, big gaps in exploration, and the ability to go and stake quite a lot of ground. But just by way of the scale of what we have in the said copper basin and the amount of money that's going into it over the next, 5, 6 years, it probably has to be favorite.
I'm not going to say it was unexpected, but I was still low key hoping you'd say it was the porphyry stuff, which we'll definitely talk about. I do want to start with the sediment hosted targets. We'll leave the porphyries for dessert here, but so it's
Yep.
as you said, the Chu-Sarysu or the Chu. How did you say? How do you pronounce it?
We should probably call it Chu-Sarysu, which is the Kazakh way to pronounce it. So Shu-Sarysu, Chu-Sarysu.
Chu-Sarysu. Okay, got it. The Chu-Sarysu Basin, south central Kazakhstan, goes all the way up to the middle of the country essentially. So it's
Yep.
central Kazakhstan, and this is what got Ivanhoe Mines interest and so on and so forth. I want to talk about how that happened in the first place. What exactly are you getting from them, and what are they getting from you?
Yeah, so I guess just maybe to start off with what drew them into it, right? Like, and I think this is a basin that a lot of majors have been aware about for quite a long time. And we've been in it for quite a long time, and really one of the edges that we have had, and this applies quite literally across Kazakhstan, is that as a business, we've spent a huge amount of time building out data sets. They now cover the entirety of Kazakhstan. We believe that those data sets are unmatched when it comes to our peers in country, whether they're big or small explorers. And we also believe they're unmatched in terms of like even what the state has. So that gives us a real edge when we are talking to different groups around these opportunities because we can sit back and say, look, there's probably not anybody that's done any more work within this particular basin. We have multiple different data layers. We've built 3D models which cover the entirety of the whole basin. And then to add to that, from a technical prospectivity standpoint, as I said, you've got what is the third largest said copper basin in the world. You have three major producing copper operations within that basin that collectively make up 27 million tons of contained copper. The largest of which has been mined for 100 years and has done over 200,000 tons of plated copper. And then again, a setup where 60 years worth of no follow-on work from there. So a bit of a no-brainer in that respect. And really the conversation with all the majors that we engage with is the opportunity is not just the projects that we might already have within the basin. The opportunity is much broader than that at a basin scale. Let's leverage the heavy lifting that we've done as a business in building out these data sets. Let's leverage the heavy lifting that we've done in terms of the interpretation and the targets that we now have from that. And then let's try to be collaborative, like bring your expertise into this and let's work together to go and tackle this at real scale. And that's really kind of how all of these conversations came to fruition.
Hmm. So to go back to it, and I appreciate the background story. I should have asked about that first, but to go back to what do they get from you? What do you get? What do you get from them?
Yeah, of course. So in the case of Ivanhoe, we it's a an option and earn-in agreement. So as it stands right now, the whole joint venture will span an area of around 16,000 square kilometers. About 80% of that is granted right now. The other 20% has been provisionally granted or working its way through to being, formally granted. For context, for anybody in Europe, that's the size of, or it's larger than Northern Ireland, about half the size of Belgium, as you say. Anyone in the US, it's like the state of Connecticut. So a massive land package. And effectively, we've gone and staked, as I said, in terms of what's available within the basin, some of the most prospective chunks across the entire basin. The deal is set up so that over the first 2 years, there is 18.7 million US dollars, which has been committed. So that is money that is in the bank that is being spent as we speak. We expect this year that we'll do around 15 or 16,000 meters worth of drilling with that capital, alongside some pretty significant geophysical campaigns as well. From there, Ivanhoe have the option to then earn into 51% of the projects by spending up to $115 million and doing over 200,000 meters worth of drilling. At that point in time, we are granted a royalty on any project that moves forward. We still continue to be carried through to them completing a pre-feasibility study on any project confirming over 1 million tons of contained copper, getting mining permits, and then actually committing $70 million towards building a mine. So at that point in time, once those three hurdles have been hit, they will have 80%, we will have 20% plus our royalty. The 20% that we have from there, we can opt to take a loan from Ivanhoe into production. That loan we would partially repay by way of free cash flow from any operations, and then part of it would just come back to us as a distribution from any dividends. So probably the best way to think about that loan is that it's kind of akin to a net profits interest. So breaking all of that down, big picture, if a discovery is made and it gets put into production, we'll have a royalty, we'll have a quasi net profits interest. And then for each project that advances all the way through, we'll have $7.5 million worth of cash payments. Why I get so excited about this, and also likewise, our first quantum partnership, which is structured in a very similar manner, is that, it is long dated, but we are effectively potentially building a royalty portfolio over, an entire basin. Sorry, I should say the most prospective parts of that entire basin. And that is really quite cool and something that we've kind of worked towards for quite a long time now. Just from a practicality standpoint, we're the operator of these projects as well. And alongside that, we will see north of $2 million come into Pallas throughout the course of this year as cash payments for both a management fee, and also we negotiated some small cash payments annually for each of the projects that we have.
I'm going to try to translate all of that to my
Yes.
75 IQ brain here. But so essentially, they put 15 million down into exploration. They get 51%. That's kind of the first stage.
No, so sorry. There's 18.7 million that has come in, which gives them 20% of the project right now. We have 80%.
Yep.
For them to earn into 51%, they need to spend a further $115 million.
Okay.
It's a 51%. The whole spend number is up to 135 million US.
Right. What happens to that 80-20 split if they walk, like if they don't want to spend that $115 million here?
So at 51%, if they earn into 51% and they opt not to move forward with the project, so if they walk away, 2% comes back to us. So the ownership goes from 51% Ivanhoe, 49% Pallas, to 51% Pallas, 49% Ivanhoe. They cannot contribute again until they're diluted down to 25%. So effectively, we take control of the project, we have the reins of it, we can move it forward. They cannot contribute again until the ownership split moves to 25%. I believe, and I need to triple check this, but I believe they could instead just elect to walk away with a royalty. Again, please don't quote me on that. I need to double check that. If they earn into 80% and they opt not to move it forward, the project remains theirs, but there are certain obligations on them to continue to move it forward. I can't kind of necessarily go into the details of what that looks like because there are, not trying to be coy, but there are sort of confidentiality around that. Like,
Sure.
We have to get approved from those guys what we can put out. But there are certain obligations on them to kind of continue to move the project forward. Bear in mind at that point in time that they have earned into 81% of the project. A very, very significant amount of capital has gone into the ground, and they have committed actually to towards $70 million towards building the mine. So to get to that, sorry, no, I shouldn't say that. To get to 80%, 80%, they have to have completed a pre-feasibility study, but we continue to get carried, to the point where they have to commit towards building a mine. So there's certain obligations on them to keep moving the projects forward.
So, and that has to be in a PFS again. So it's not just having a deposit. What happens if they define less? Just to be silly here, 999,000 tons. Do they keep that 51%, or would you have to renegotiate the contract? Or is there anything else that you could do?
Look, I mean, we'd have a commercial conversation if they wanted to move the project forward. I think the bigger question, though, is that would that be a project that stacks up for an Ivanhoe? Right. I
Mhm.
mean, I don't think we're going after, and in the context of First Quantum as well, the stated goal is that we are going after copper systems that have over 5 million tons of contained copper, right? That is arguably what you would kind of class as tier one, and arguably what makes sense for a major to go and develop, bearing in mind the fact that they already have other world-class assets in their portfolio. So there's a certain size threshold that naturally has to stack up. If the projects don't get there, those guys will probably walk away. Whether we opt to keep the project or not, we kind of have the same goal. I don't really want to go after small targets here. Like I'm not necessarily interested in small prospects. Arguably, if we find something that is 990,000 tons of contained copper, there's probably value in that, albeit not necessarily for a major, but for us. So, would we commercialize that? Yes, obviously. But again, I think they would probably walk away if it was a small deposit anyway.
Would you, are there any clawback rights, back in rights, change of control clauses if Ivanhoe is acquired, or if their stake in the JV itself is sold?
The short answer is yes. Again, I've got to be somewhat careful about what the details around that, but
Yeah.
broadly speaking, we have, let's call it sort of standard, right of first refusal clauses. Are there change of control provisions? No, I don't believe so, but there are certain provisions in that scenario that are there that kind of protect us if somebody steps in and doesn't put as much emphasis or value into the basin as an Ivanhoe or a First Quantum would.
Mm. You kind of touched upon it here, and that's actually something that I think I'm done with the details of that contract. And I appreciate whatever you can tell me. Again, you're not a public company, so you're not obligated to tell
Yep.
me any of this. So I appreciate anything that you can tell me. But and you talked to them about this, but why? What do they want all of this in the first place? Like, are they genuinely looking for the next copper mine where they're actually going to be producing from, or is this more just of a copper optionality during what seems to be gearing up at least to be a generational bull run in copper?
Look, I think, again, I can't speak for Ivanhoe or First Quantum, but those are groups that, explore, sorry, that like their stated goal is to go and discover and build mines. Both of them do that, right? Like in the case of Ivanhoe, arguably the best copper discovery of the last 2 decades in Kamoa-Kakula, like, a 42 million ton contained copper camp. And then case in point, they've taken that phenomenal discovery and built what is now the world's second or third largest copper producer, that just generates, phenomenal margins for them. So again, like I can't speak for both of those groups, but they're not here just to explore for optionality. They're here because they want to discover and build mines. I think that I can say on their behalf for sure.
Hmm. You say that you manage the projects. What does that look like then in that case, and how much decision power that I suppose you'd listen to them, but do they really get decision power here?
Yeah, I don't look at it as if who gets to make the call at the end of the day, because it's genuinely collaborative. So we have a 4-person technical committee across both of the joint ventures. Ultimately, they do have a casting call on that if they want to. But really, it's like, let's pool our expertise here to make the right decisions, right?
Hmm.
At a future dated point in time, might there be disagreements about how we, progress things? Maybe, but it's collaborative, right? So the goal is like, if either group has expertise, let's put it to good work here to go and make discoveries. So, again, they have that casting call, which I think is totally fair enough, because clearly both of those groups are putting the absolute lion's share of capital, in fact, all of the capital into the projects. Hence, if they ever needed to call on that casting vote, they could. But look, it's collaborative, as I said. We've had Ivanhoe, in country many times now to kind of lean on their expertise from the Central African copper setting. Likewise, First Quantum have actually built out their own team in country. And to the point now where they're continuing to expand in Kazakhstan outside of us, which was always the goal for them, right? We were kind of the platform to go in, jump on some of those early stage opportunities, but they've become super bullish on Kazakhstan and they've gone and staked their own projects outside of that, which was, always the goal and totally fine. So they're both partners, but also going beyond that. Yeah, so look, I'd say it's collaborative and that, that's kind of always really the goal.
Mm. I'm sorry if I'm being annoying with these things. I'm just objectively interested in how it works when that size of a company engages with a private company of your size, and how it all works, and also kind of making sure that you essentially don't get bullied into doing something that you don't want to do. That's where I'm coming from with these questions. And you actually brought up a good point, because I also wondered how much of their time and attention you have access to, because again, they're advancing and operating in a couple of other things that need a lot of effort and attention. So how much access to their senior technical team do you get?
Um, Certainly the exploration teams and their generative arms, their exploration arms, a huge amount, right? Like, I mean, they're in country all the time. They've built out. So in the case of First Quantum, again, they've built out their own Kazakh team, and our guys work alongside them, day in, day out. Ivanhoe, since we signed this deal, have been in country two times. That they'll be there again sort of mid-May. We're kicking off a massive mapping and prospecting project with some of the Ivanhoe team members, bringing that expertise from Central Africa into central Kazakhstan. So we work with them, a lot. It really genuinely is an all hands on deck type scenario here where, again, what we do well, we bring to the table. What they do well, they bring to the table, and kind of marry those two skill sets.
Let's talk about what kind of work you want to do here this year, and where you guys have gotten to. Yeah, what is it? What is it that you want to do? When does it start? Kind of a high level overview, and then we'll get into the details.
Yeah, so what's exciting is in the said copper setting, we're going to do 17 or 18,000 square kilometers of drilling. So that drilling is kind of targeted towards two things. One will be direct target drilling, where we either have low-hanging fruit there by way of work that was done during the Soviet period, or where specifically in the context of our First Quantum projects, we've done the previous recon work, we've done the geophysics, and there are targets there that are, that very much warrant getting a drill rig over them. So again, there'll be that direct target drilling that happens across the basin. And then likewise, we're actually doing what's called some stratigraphic drilling, which is effectively stepping back, looking at the broader architecture within the basin, and setting ourselves up for future success. So effectively saying, look, we own a good chunk of this now. Let's look at the big picture side of the equation here. Use that then to kind of hone in for future drill campaigns, future drill work that we would do. And also, there's an opportunity here to not just look at the known deposit model, the known deposit targets. In that sense, the USGS did some work and they estimated there was 25 million tons of undiscovered copper across the basin. That's fantastic. That's exciting. That's a big number. But what excites me is what's outside of that known. If we step into the conceptual, what might also be there. So again, doing some of that stratigraphic drilling to kind of look at new horizons as well and what could potentially be there.
Are you, I'm wondering about exactly what you're targeting here, but are you going to be targeting the Jeskasgan formation, if I'm saying that correctly, specifically, or is it something else in the basin that you go after first?
So the known deposit styles, the known deposits are within what's called the Jeskasgan and Tuskuduk formations. That is where you have, the current Jeskasgan operation, Jelandi, and then Jamanaibat, which again make up that 27 million tons of contained copper across those three deposits. I believe, and based on some of the work that we've done, that there is scope for targets outside of those horizons. So different formations, we believe that there is the potential for that. What is quite cool is that through the Ivanhoe Alliance, we've gone and staked some of those kind of conceptual targets. And I would argue there's probably not too many other groups in the world that would back you to put capital into those kind of conceptual targets and plays. What excites me about that is that that's exactly how you go and find the Kamoa coolers, right? If you look at that of what Ivanhoe did in the Central African Copper Belt, they stepped outside of the known deposit model. Or sorry, they looked at a new part of the belt and said, oh, this is, other people have kind of written this off as unprospective, an area called the Western Forelands. It's the rest of the basin is mature, it's been well explored. They went and looked at that new search space and discovered Kamoa-Kakula. I would argue that when you look in those new search spaces, that's where the big ones get found. So that's what I get excited about.
Hmm. So is mineralization here expected to be structurally remobilized, or is it primarily syngenetic or diagenetic? How do you see that happening?
So I guess across both the copper belt and like the Chu-Sarysu setting, on both places you kind of rely on reduction to form the major metal deposits. I guess that matters because it pulls the dissolved metals out of the groundwater and turns them into the solid minerals. So effectively, that's kind of where the copper gets dumped out. In the Chu-Sarysu, what we're relying on there is effectively that reduction comes from outside. So it's things like hydrocarbons that are brought into the sandstones by flowing water. And that also is then when you kind of have the copper getting dumped out up alongside, potential traps or impermeable layers. So I would be doing it a disservice in trying to kind of go right into the weeds of this, because this is very much, Daniel and Dave and certainly the Ivanhoe and First Quantum team's expertise and not mine. But effectively what we're looking for is these copper getting dumped out along these impermeable layers, not dissimilar to sort of a hydrocarbon play. So again, where you have oil and gas getting dumped out within impermeable traps, very similar things to what we're looking for within the Chu-Sarysu Basin. It's a bit unique and distinct, very separate to a porphyry type play, where in the sense of a porphyry, you've got these big alteration patterns, and it's much tighter and more defined. Here, you want to have much bigger exposure. And the reason for that is that, said hosted copper systems are effectively like a coal seam. If they are continuous, they will be flat lying, they'll be like pancakes, hopefully shallow dipping, and just very big contiguous systems. So again, you want to have more land rather than less. And the way to explore for them is very, very different, versus a porphyry.
And that historic drilling that you talked about, do you know exactly where it is? Can you go to those same spots?
Yeah, so we have the benefit of the Soviets having done some really solid work prior to us. What I would make very clear is that the resolution is tiny, and by that I mean we have like one or two drill holes spaced at like 25 kilometers and some a 25-kilometer space in between them. So like we've got a lot of work to do to say what's in between that, and that's where it gets exciting, because we have the key stratigraphy, the key, target horizon. We know that kind of exists between those two holes, and hence we've got to go and fill in the gaps. But just to kind of give you a sense, and bear in mind, we've got a massive package there in multiple different targets, and they do look and feel very different. But to kind of give you a sense of some of the tangible things that we'll drill this year as direct targets, we have a brownfield project called Jezkazgan East, which is immediately on the flanks of Jezkazgan. Again, Jezkazgan is the major deposit within the Chu-Sarysu, 22 million tons of contained copper, mined for 100 years, world-class asset. There are like up to, I think, 10 open cuts, 10 underground shafts. So it's a complex, not a single mine, just a massive operation. And we've staked right on the doorstep of that. So quite literally a few hundred meters away from the nearest open pit. The thesis was super simple, right? We didn't have to rack our brains too hard. The question was, is there a continuation of a world-class ore body at surface and or under shallow cover? What we have going for us is that we know there was some drilling in the 1950s, which intercepted economic copper hits. So I think it was 19 meters at 1.1% copper from surface, and then 27 meters at 1.2% copper from 14 meters depth. The caveat to that is that We know it's in our license. We don't know where. So we don't have the collar information for it. So that's a really clear, tangible target for us to go and hopefully try to, twin or replicate. And then if we can step that out and prove continuity, we hopefully have a discovery in our hands. That's one example.
Is that,
Another,
I'm sorry for interrupting. We can
yeah.
definitely, we should definitely move on to the other ones. But is that target specifically Jessica's GAN style, sort of vertically stacked lenses that you think, or do you have a different deposit model here?
So it's targeting the same host formation as Jez-Kazgan. And we know we have right on the edge of that license boundary. We know we have that Jez-Kazgan formation. The question is, what does continuity look like? And what does the dip of that look like? And the short answer is we don't know until we do that work there. Just to kind of give context as what the Jez-Kazgan ore body looks like, you have a relatively flat line, so up to kind of a 10-degree dip ore body that is 50 meters in width at its peak, several kilometers long and up to several hundred meters in width. You then have multiple stacked horizons within those formations. So that's kind of really the beauty of these said copper systems is the largest one actually, again, is sort of relatively close to you. Sorry, the longest one by way of continuity is in the Kupferschiefer, where you have a contiguous 60-kilometer long system, right? It runs the entirety of that. So if you get it right, these things can kind of go on forever. And again, that's kind of what we're hoping happens within our Jez-Kazgan East license.
Why I ask that is because I was also under the impression that you have something that compares to the Jaman IBAT, where it's also a flat line, but it's rather thin or well, thinner ore
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
So like, is your structural and geometrical model at another target similar to that one, or where does that come in?
So we've got a number of different targets. Some of them look and feel like Jez-Kazgan, and some of them look and feel more so like Jaman-Ibart. So for reference, Jaman-Ibart is actually the third largest deposit within Chu-Sarysu. It is an active producer, so it's got just shy of 3 million tons of contained copper, and at the moment, it's actually feeding the smelter, which the smelter near Jez-Kazgan does around 200,000 tons of plated copper as it stands right now. So different targets that are kind of analogs for those. And then again, like we have the conceptual side of things, which don't look like either of them are completely new in their entirety.
Hmm. What are you using to vector in on targets? Is it similar across the different targets, as in deciding exactly where to drill goals, or is it different?
The gold standard for us is drilling, and the reason for that, that goes without a saying across all forms of exploration. But the reason that you would make the argument to drill sooner in a sediment-hosted copper setting is because, again, of the continuity. If it's there, it's there. Now, again, that's a very simple way of stating it. But, really, if you can go and get an understanding in 3D of what the stratigraphy looks like, which different units are there, which might be mineralized, which might not be, you go and do that sooner rather than later. The second kind of gold tier in said copper is seismic. Again, we have, and the reason for that is, again, you pull out the stratigraphy quite nicely with seismic. The problem with it is it's very, very expensive. But what we have going for us in a big work stream that we have just kind of kicked off now is in the south of the basin over our licenses that we have there. There was a whole bunch of seismic that was done in the 1970s, looking at it from a hydrocarbon standpoint. We are hoping to go and digitize that from quite literally, physical format, get those old seismic tapes, digitize them, hopefully put that to work in future work programs. But effectively, we're going to roll out nearly everything under the sun from a geophysical standpoint. It'll be seismic, gravity, and some other sort of like, AMT, MT sort of like geophysical campaigns. Because realistically, the goal here is to set ourselves up for the future. So get an understanding of which of those geophysical types will work. We've got a lot of Soviet data that we get to work with already. And now it's kind of building on that resolution with higher resolution from more modern work and really getting a sense of what's going to work over the next 2, 3, 4 years as we put serious money to work in the basin.
What about from a geochemical perspective? What's kind of the chemical composition of your Pathfinder elements? I mean, is it specifically Molly that you're looking for, or perhaps a combination of multiple elements?
So, other than the conceptual targets that we have that do outcrop, we're predominantly looking at a cover play here. So, about 80% of the basin is undercover.
Hmm.
I'd argue that that which is not undercover, the Soviets probably found it. They were very, very good explorers. So, really, the opportunity for us is to kind of look under shallow cover and, go as deep as you want. Really, the sky's the limit in that respect. So, we rely less so on surface geochem. One work stream that we are doing right now is hydrogeochem. So again, this goes beyond the weeds of my expertise by a long stretch, but effectively, I think the best way to simplify would be to say, where did fluids previously flow, and what does that mean for the implication of where copper might have gone and been dumped out? Again, what we have going for us here is we have a number of Soviet era boreholes that were drilled as wells. And so effectively what we're going to do almost at a basin level, or certainly over good chunks of the basin, are these big hydrogeochem programs alongside the drilling, alongside the geophysics.
Hmm. Don't worry, by the way, I've been out of my depth for the last 45 or 50 minutes anyway, so you can just literally tell me anything and I'll believe it. Um,
I'm worried about the people that have real expertise in these systems because again, I'm more of a corporate schmuck at this point in time, unfortunately, and the rest of our guys have that real expertise. So those are the guys that I'm worried about. So again, I feel like I'm doing them a disservice, but yeah.
do you get to look at some of the Soviet era drilling and look at stuff like alteration assemblages and other stuff like that that kind of help you uh, put together that model and then maybe go and back test it on as a predictive model, go and back test it on some of the other basins that you mentioned earlier?
So where alteration really comes into play for us is in our porphyry portfolio.
Hmm.
And one of the data layers that we've built out is actually taking the alteration mapping that was done by the Soviets and digitizing that across the entire country. So that's a really cool data set that we have. To be completely honest with you, we've only really just scratched the surface of the power of that data set. So like it's one thing to have the data, it's another thing to spend the time interpreting. And I think there's probably enough data that we have in the whole of the company that you could spend several lifetimes as a single geo trying to, pull stuff from it. So yeah, look, the alteration side of the equation really kind of comes into play in the porphyry setting. Um, I know you're familiar with Aris, and those guys have big multi-kilometer Soviet era geochem anomalies and alteration, porphyry sort of style alteration there. We have very similar things in our porphyry projects, and we're in the same belt, so that's probably not hugely surprising. So that's where we lean on the alteration side of the equation. Um, you touched on predictive modeling, which I could go into some of the machine learning work that we have done. I'm probably jumping around between belts here, but we have also, in certain settings, looked at using machine learning as a prospectivity hotspot tool. So effectively taking the known existing deposits, using those as a training data set to say, where else could things be? Um, we've done this very successfully in the gold belt that we're in. In other settings, it has been completely useless, completely useless. It's just too complex of a geological history there. So we really do throw quite a lot at this in terms of both data, trying to be smart about how we use that data when we come to targeting.
We'll definitely get to the porphyry stuff. There's a couple of things that I want to know about that too. But so knowing everything that you've told me so far, what's your favorite target in the basin specifically? Earlier, I asked you which group of projects would you keep. You said the basin, and now let's go zoom in a little bit further. What do you keep within the basin if you only had to keep one?
That's a tough question. And I'm going to be diplomatic here in terms of saying on our wholly owned stuff, I think in terms of near-term tangibility, it's hard to pass up, just Kazakhstan East. Again, very real near-term potential there. From our Ivanhoe projects, I would have to go with a project called Goluboki. Um, Again, the rationale for that is that we've got Soviet era work where they drilled a hole that intercepted what they described as up to 3% copper over tens of meters. I would love to interpret that as 3% over 30 meters. I think more realistically, what that means is they have a grab sample of up to 3% within a broader mineralized horizon, but nonetheless, like a really obvious target for us to go and try to replicate. And then within our first quantum portfolio, the project that I like most is a project called Bohr. The reason that I like that is that it's completely untested. Some Soviet work that was done there inferred a trap, this beautiful looking trap. We did some follow-on modern geophysics there that effectively confirmed what we believe to be a trap. Offset from that, you have 140 meters worth of drilling at up to 0.1% copper. So absolutely not economic. But what's really important is that it's smoke in the system, right?
Hmm.
We haven't tested the trap. It's distinctly offset from that. And this year we'll get to go and punch a hole into the middle of the trap. So a bit diplomatic there, the three across those portfolios. And look, again, I think I'm mostly answering that in terms of near-term tangible results.
Hmm. Is the dome magnetic at Bohr?
Mag, so we've certainly run mag across different parts of the portfolio. The short answer is it hasn't told us a huge amount.
Hmm.
Yeah, you can run mag, gravity, AMT, MT, um, and with various varied levels of success, right? Again, unlike a porphyry where you have, big alteration and whatnot, these are flat lines. So sometimes the host stratigraphy gets lost in the other stratigraphies. And that's why drilling and seismic are really kind of the golden tickets.
So conductivity wouldn't help much either.
It can and it can't. And to be completely honest with you, that is why we're rolling out such a broad suite of work this year, is to see what works in different settings across the basin.
Hmm. What'd you say you're drilling again? I think it's over 20,000 meters at this point.
So across our whole portfolio, there's
Um,
around 21,000 meters of drilling, which is spread across 7 projects.
right. How much of that is in this basin?
In the basin, it's around 17 or 18,000 meters.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. How do you, how many holes do you think that it's gonna be? How deep are they? I suppose different targets get different depth, but how many holes is that gonna be?
That is a great question that I should absolutely have the answer to. I think we're probably looking at in the vicinity of probably 30 to 40 holes across that level of drilling. I think, there will be some holes that are certainly deeper. So we'll probably, in the case of First Quantum, we're going to go and drill a hole that's 1,000 meters in depth. That is substantially deeper than the target horizon. So the depth of the target is give or take, 400 or 500 meters. And I think, broadly speaking, we have things that outcrop, which are conceptual targets. We have things that are subcropping, so under shallow cover. And then where we've absolutely capped it is, up to 1,000 meters of depth. So we have effectively written off anything where we say the inferred depth of the target horizon is more than 1,000 meters because that's not a real obvious starting point for us. So we kind of run the whole spectrum, but I think probably the best way to think about it is for the most part, the target horizon is on average probably between sort of 300 and 500 meters of depth. And certainly the drilling that we're doing this year reflects that, with the one exception being just Kazganis, where we're right on surface.
That if it's 40 holes, 17,000 meters, 4 by 4, 16, 450 meters on average depth. I would have expected it to be less because it's sedimentary. Is it because of the cover? Or how thick is the cover?
It's because we want to have an understanding of what lies underneath the host stratigraphy as well. So the reason that we are drilling deeper in, say, again, I'll use the first quantum project, Bohr, the depth to the key target horizon is probably around 400 or 500 meters. But as I kind of alluded to, there hasn't been any real work. Well, sorry, I shouldn't say there hasn't been any real work done. We want to very much focus now on the what ifs. What could lie underneath that in terms of other potential traps?
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm getting way out of my depth here, but I think I'm kind of getting a hang of what you're going to be doing there, and that also explains the 1,000 meter hole as well. Um, because again, I'm low key hoping to see 1,000 meter holes on the Porphyry project. Is drilling season related here? I know it is in the northeastern part of the country, but when can you go and drill these things?
So we've got a rig on our first hole right now. So this is kind of the start of the summer season. The summer season is April, May through October, November, if you're really lucky, December. Certainly in terms of comfort, that's when you want to be out in the field, although it does get very hot in the middle of that. You can drill through winter. Obviously, there are safety precautions and considerations that come into play there, and obviously it does get brutally cold. So you can definitely drill through winter. Other groups do that. We haven't historically. We tend to focus on that summer season, and then we kind of use the off season to take all the data, interpret it, and figure out what we want to do next.
How's topography and accessibility? I mean, it's a basin in terms of topography, but how's accessibility, infrastructure, and everything? Are the targets easy to reach?
Yeah, so we're blessed here. And this is me just kind of saying this broadly for Kazakhstan, but it's for the most part steppe, right? So you kind of think of Western Australian kind of terrain, very flat lying. I think a lot of people that haven't been to Kazakhstan that go there are shocked at the accessibility to projects. So we operate out of towns, we've never operated out of a fly camp.
Hmm.
Again, we've got a massive portfolio, so there are some that are harder to get to than others, but for the most part, very, very accessible. And then infrastructure, both when it comes to, so like let's talk about the said copper basin. We are on the doorstep of a smelter. We have rail, we have road, we have power. Again, we operate out of towns, not fly camps. Again, people that haven't been to Kazakhstan, I think, are shocked at the amount of infrastructure and at how good access is there.
Hmm.
Not to say, look, there are some projects in our portfolio that are further afield, a bit more difficult to get to. Nothing like, other parts of the world that are very, very remote. But broadly, we're pretty blessed.
Okay. Yeah, you don't have to throw the Andes into the fire, but I kind of felt like you almost wanted to.
I was
Uh,
going to go there, but I'll leave it.
I know Kazakhstan is sparsely populated. Was it 20 million people live there, but it's
Yeah,
what is it, the ninth largest country in the world? It's a huge country.
by size,
Um,
yeah.
so communities, how is that in the basin? Any communities that you have to keep in mind?
Yeah, look, again, I'm speaking broadly here, but Kazakhstan has phenomenal, this is where we have a lot going for us, is like there's really good backing of projects, and it doesn't have a history of, I guess, not having a social license to operate, again, like other parts of the world. Now, I will be completely transparent in saying there are some parts of the country, very, very small, like pockets, where certain projects, as you would expect, have some opposition. That is except that that's a rarity rather than sort of like a commonplace. As a great case in point, across we own 50 licenses, across 99 plus percent of those, we've never had an issue with getting easements, which are effectively like our ability to kind of go in and explore on a particular project, land access kind of easements. In certain cases, we've where there's been sort of agricultural interactions, the 1%, we've had to, go and work a little bit harder from those. But again, we're very, very blessed in that respect.
Right. Okay. There's a lot to talk about here because it's a big basin. What am I forgetting to ask you specifically on the basin so that we can move on to the north?
I think we've covered it pretty well. Yeah, yeah.
It's again, it's just a lot. I'm trying to think about the best way to cover these things. It is a lot though, and if you get annoyed by me, just feel free to leave. Just close your laptop and tell me your internet dropped off.
No, I'm enjoying it. I love talking about our projects. You might get annoyed by me blabbing on, so.
I've got plenty of time. It's Friday evening, so I've got nothing else to do, nowhere else to
True.
be. But it's let's do travel to the north of the country again, saving the porphyry stuff for last year, so we can talk a little bit about the. I'm gonna have a hard time pronouncing these things, although I shouldn't. But it's Stepnyak Kosketau belt. Am I saying that
It,
right?
it took me a while as well. Yeah, look, close enough. Stepnyak Kokshetau.
Okay, I'm not going to try anymore. Just call it Stepnyak. I can say that much. Walk me through your geological thesis here. Organic gold is what you're looking for, but talk to me about what exactly you're targeting.
Yes. So broadly, we are in the Central Asian orogenic gold belt. On one side in Uzbekistan, you have the world's largest gold resource deposit, I should say, with a mine called Muruntau. I forget the exact numbers, but I believe it's 180 million ounces of gold, and it does 3 million ounces of production. On the other end, you have Oyu Tolgой's, Rio Tinto's Oyu Tolgoi in Mongolia. This Kazakh portion of it that's wedged in Kazakhstan is called the Stepnyak belt. Within just the Kazakh subset of that, again, we're going after orogenic gold. And in that Kazakh subset, you've got over 45 million ounces worth of existing endowment. And what's incredibly unique here is that all of that was discovered pre-1930s, with the exception of a mine that weirdly Glencore owns and operates, which is called Vasilkovskoye. Vasilkovskoye is a 15 million ounce gold deposit, does around, I think, 650,000 ounces of production. It was discovered in 1962 or three. So a world-class orogenic gold belt by endowment, a 60, but really kind of 100-year gap in real discovery. If you kind of take that setting and apply it to the other, big belts around the world, be it Western Australia, be it the Abitibi in Canada, be it West Africa, the Birimian, and think about the discoveries that happened during that time frame, during those last 60 years, it's pretty clear, at least in our eyes, that there's a huge amount more gold to be discovered within this belt. The thesis for us in terms of the projects that we have right now is that everything in an orogenic gold setting is structurally controlled. So first and foremost, the projects that we have are on the intersection of major structures. The second reason that we are where we are is that each of the major deposits within this Stepnyak setting is also associated with a particular type of intrusive called the Stepnyak or the Kokshetau intrusive. Apologies, I forget which one it was, but a particular type of intrusive. All of the major deposits have that, and again, our licenses also have that. And then the third kind of tier to why we are where we are is that we have Soviet era grab samples and Soviet era work that had up to 40 grams per ton of gold. So first is structure, second is the intrusive, and then third is Soviet era low hanging fruit by way of the samples that were taken during that time.
What's a There's probably not one answer to it, but what's a dominant host rock here? Isn't specifically I'm thinking about, is there any evidence of reactive sedimentary units that can help, if you will, the mineral deposition?
I should absolutely know the answer to this question, but I would absolutely have to refer to Dan on it. To be completely honest with you, he is. I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to get him involved. Again, it's probably criminal, but I've been removed from the tools now for a while as a geo, so forgive me.
Well, no, it's totally fine. I again, you could have just lied to me. I wouldn't have known.
I,
Um,
I could have, but I look silly enough as is from time to time. I don't want to make myself look any more silly. So yeah.
what do you want to? Maybe we'll get Dan on eventually and do kind
Yep.
of
Yep.
a geo deep dive. I will need help in preparing that. Maybe I'll get Tom on my end, and then we'll just let Tom and Dan do the interview, and then you and I can go and do something else. What
It's outsourcing. I like it. Yeah.
what work has been completed to date here on this belt, and what more has to happen here before you can actually go and drill it?
So stepping into the work that we've done on our projects in like specifically, so what we were kind of going off prior was mag and gravity surveys that we had that kind of covered the belt. And then again, not particularly high resolution, but like geochem work that the Soviets had done. So really our goal was to kind of come in and do modern geophysics, so mag surveys over both of the licenses, do follow on kind of tighter geochem, and then kind of get to a position where hopefully we have drill targets that warrant doing work on. Now, full disclosure in this belt, the tricky thing is again is that we're under a bit of cover here. So this is probably one of the hardest, parts of the portfolio from a targeting standpoint. in that, again, we've got a bit of cover to work with.
How
But
much
where
of
we are,
cover?
what?
How much of a cover?
Um, so again, like, I mean, well, so there's some immediate kind of subcropping, targets that we have there. So we're looking in the case of Alacol at like, maybe up to 50 meters of cover. So we're not talking about a huge amount. Really the goal this year, and we're actually just about to go and drill Alacol. The goal this year will be to do what's called KGK drilling, which is effectively akin to like air core drilling. And what we want to do is punch underneath that cover, get into kind of the target horizon, take some samples there and see how we go,
Mm.
obviously. Um, we have drilled 2 holes on Sulakol last year. That was a scout drilling campaign. Um, we didn't hit economic grades across either of those 2 holes, and it would have been fantastic. Obviously, we'd made a discovery, but really the goal for that project was, again, to give ourselves a broader picture of the understanding. If you think about 2 holes in the context of a 500 square K license, it's probably not hugely surprising that we haven't made a discovery there. So collectively across our entire portfolio now, we've drilled 4 or 5 holes, and this is the year where the rubber actually hits the road in terms of doing some more meaningful campaigns.
I jokingly and politically incorrectly call it KGB drilling sometimes, just so I can remember what it is. Um,
I like it.
this is the project you're paying for everything on this project yourself, as far
Yes.
as I understand, right?
Yes.
How much will that cost? The work they want to do this year?
So the drilling that we're doing on Sulakol, sorry, on the drilling that we're doing on Alacol now, it's a 2 or 3 hole program. I think those holes are designed at between 250 to 300 meters each, depending on which holes it is. That's going to cost us just north of 100,000 US.
Oh, okay.
They're not
That's
even drilling's incredibly cheap in Kazakhstan. So all in, we look at about 140 US per meter, for diamond drilling. So KGK is cheaper than that.
yeah, yeah. Where do you assay?
ALS Island.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um, what's turnaround on that? I was just kind of thinking about how far that is.
Yeah.
How quickly do you get it back?
So we kick off now, and we're almost effectively drilling contiguously for the next 6 months. So we will have a couple of rigs working kind of side by side, but we're not going to go and have like 7 rigs drilling all at once. We'll effectively move from project to project and stack it up through the year. What will that look like in practicality? From about kind of the start of the second half of the year onwards, the assays will start flowing in. So Dan knows this way better than I do. I kind of just see the ALS emails come in from time to time and don't pay as much attention to when we drill them, but it's 4 or 5 month turnaround, give or take, is probably the rough answer.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just kind of getting an idea of how busy you're going to be. But as you said or touched upon, this is going to be sort of the busiest year for you so far as I understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah. How is it topography, accessibility in this part of the country? How's that?
So yeah, look, laying 4 cards on the table, like topography and accessibility is fantastic. We're quite literally 2 hours out of the capital, Astana, and there are towns that we, drive half an hour in and out from, to go and access these sites. So, very, very accessible. Um, this is the one part of the country where we have a little bit of agricultural overlay. This was one of those areas where access to projects or getting those easements took a bit longer because naturally where you have that interaction between exploration and people doing farming, it's more sensitive. So like full disclosure that this was a part of it. One of this solar coal was one of the projects where we had to do a bit more heavy lifting to get those easements. But for the most part, no, well, I mean, those are now entirely in play. So that's kind of the one consideration here, but otherwise access is fantastic.
What would make you step away from the organic stuff? Like, is it something in the geology that you see and you say, okay, we're for the time being, we're going to park this? And specifically why I'm asking this is because of the size of the project, right? Because maybe it's not exactly where you drilled, but you find something that could look geologically promising. How do you know to stop pulling on the thread and spending money on specifically that project?
So like, and I'm pretty open about this. The orogenic gold has been probably the most frustrating part of our portfolio because we haven't been anywhere near as aggressive on it as we would have liked to have been. And the sole reason for that is because we've had such a massive focus and such a huge amount of interest in our copper portfolio. And, realistically, you can't do everything, right? That's kind of just the reality. There are only so many hours in the day. And so the orogenic gold has received less love despite the technical prospectivity. So it's been a bit frustrating for us, but what would kind of cause us to walk away from it? I think that's probably the answer more than anything. It's not having the ability to be able to focus on it as it should. Look, from a pure technical standpoint, I think realistically, drilling and not kind of hitting what we necessarily believe to be there. So I think we probably need to put a further, 4 to 5 holes into each of these projects to have a sense as to what is there. And if the thesis doesn't play out, we will kill these projects and move on. And for full disclosure, we have killed other projects. We can kind of touch on it in our porphyry. Our porphyry setting, one of the projects that we will actively be relinquishing because, again, the thesis hasn't played out.
Mm.
We're not here to land bank stuff. We're not here to try to vend projects to other groups. If they don't make sense, we move on.
I guess a bit easier to kill porphyry stuff than it is orogenic stuff. So that's
That's
really where I.
it's a fair point. Yeah, no, it absolutely is because I think you can keep going in orogenic gold systems
Hmm.
for a very long time, and you can spend quite a lot of capital doing so. I guess again, kind of full disclosure, some of the things that we're looking at behind the scenes and some early conversations that we're having is there scope for partnership here? Can we replicate what we've done within the copper side of the portfolio? I think in that scenario, absolutely the projects that we have and the orogenic belt as a whole stacks up in terms of what major gold majors would be looking for. And so that's something that we're scoping out. I want to caveat that by saying that that relies on a third party, another group to move forward. So there's never any promise that any of that kind of comes to fruition. And majors always operate on their own time frames, right? We've done 2 of these deals now, and both the groups that we've done of them have been fantastic. But we've spoken to both Ivanhoe and First Quantum for years before it made sense for them to kind of move on Kazakhstan.
Hmm. I do want to talk about the porphyry stuff here, though. You mentioned that, and now that's the only thing I can think about. Ili-Balkash. Am I saying that
Yes.
right? I can say Bojikal arc because I've said it more because of Ars.
Yeah.
Fides Gliberno's confession. That's my exposure to Kazakhstan there. But
Yeah.
this is a huge and also a hugely, maybe that's not fair, but it's still a complex belt, right? Which is also
Yes.
it's covered as well if I have that right. So what let's maybe start at kind of high level here. What porphyry models are you using to guide exploration here? If you had to kind of draw a comparison, are we talking about Andy style type of porphyry, or what is it that you're looking for?
Slightly different. We see slightly different signatures here in Kazakhstan versus what you see sort of in the Andes. We do have some of the same sort of alteration footprints, but then some of the existing past producing, the existing sort of like known deposits and past producing deposits look slightly different, look and feel slightly different. Again, going into the weeds of that, please forgive me, but I would be doing that a massive disservice. Um, you know, Daniel, but then likewise some of the consultants that we've worked with. So we've brought Steve Garwin in, who is arguably a world-class kind of porphyry expert to both look at our projects and then look at, I guess, the potential of the 2 belts as a whole. Those are the right guys to kind of be going into the weeds of that kind of side of the equation.
Well, I'll make you choose again. As you can see, that's kind of a running topic. What's your favorite target here?
So on our wholly owned projects, that's an easy one here, and that's Saribastau. So why do we have that project? Why do we like it? Why am I excited about it? Again, not dissimilar to why Aris have their projects and what their projects look like. We kind of stepped into this with 4 distinct multi-kilometer Soviet era geochem anomalies. Alongside that, we had coincident, geophysical anomalies. We had, alteration that we could obviously see at surface. We've now come in, we've verified that work across each of these 4 distinct porphyry targets within the one license. On only one of 4 of those targets, we've now done IP. We have a resistivity chargeability high there. It's been kind of screaming to get a drill rig over it for a while now. We were hoping to drill it last year, but it just didn't happen logistics wise. So It's our most advanced porphyry, and we will be drilling it this year. And that's kind of an easy favorite for us. That's actually a target that Tom Woolrich was a big part of generating. So he's also a big bull on that target as well. And he's been screaming at us to go and get a drill rig over it for quite a while now. So exciting to actually finally go and do that.
He's the reason why I like it too. Again, I joke about me liking it, but then again, what do I know? I'm not a geo, so I do defer to him for a lot of these things. Um, how is it? How big could it get? That's also kind of a Tom Woolrich question, I suppose. But what is the target size here? If all of your geological dreams come true, you told me about the sediment stuff. You said 5 million tons of copper. What about here? This Cerebustio porphyry, if it works, how big is it?
Look, I think the same applies, right? So within across the two porphyry belts in Kazakhstan, so both the Boshchakal Chingiz Arc and the Ili-Balkash Arc, collectively they make up what is Kazakhstan's most well-endowed porphyry terrain, and the existing endowment across both of those is 25 million tons of contained copper. Bear in mind, I think cumulatively that covers an area of about 500,000 square kilometers. So just a mine, like a huge, huge area. But ultimately the target for us remains similar, right? Like it's over 5 million tons of contained copper. And the rationale being is that if you kind of draw a distribution of the existing deposits within the belt as it stands right now, there's a lot of gaps. And that's not an exact science, so please take that with a grain of salt. But I think it's perhaps indicative of what could potentially be there.
Hmm. How many holes do you want to put into testing that?
More than as many as possible. But look, realistically, the goal at Saribastal this year is to, at a bare minimum, do at least 2 or 3 holes, so about 1,000 meters worth of drilling. That's on the lower end of the equation. So we are raising capital right now. As we raise that capital, as that comes into the door, we'll ramp that number up. So on a status quo basis, based on what we've got there right now, we want to drill 2 to 3 holes cumulatively, about 1,000 meters into that IP target.
So not deep at all.
About 300 to 400 meters is the IP target. Yeah. Yeah.
And that cuts through the cover as well, because this is covered again, as I mentioned, right?
We've got alteration. We do have alteration here at surface. It's
Okay.
just where within the porphyry system, is mineralized, right? Like where is that horizon? And by way of the IP, that target sits at about 350, 400 meters.
What would you consider success here in terms of grade and width perspective?
So, I mean, probably look at some of the results that Aris have pulled out. And I think, certainly if we had those hits, you'd get pretty excited about it.
Mm.
What's interesting about Kazakhstan, and I think, perhaps a bit of a knock on these porphyry belts from a grade perspective is that they're not necessarily as high grade as what you see in other parts of the world. That's not to say that they don't have the capacity to be, and it's not to say that some of the past producing deposits and operations there haven't had higher grade profiles. But the two producing mines that are there right now that are absolutely still world-class, in Aktagai and Bozhakal, which collectively do about 350,000 tons of plated copper production, they're slightly lower grade. So I forget the exact grade profile, but it's not the 1% copper equivalent that you see it say like a Filo, for example, or something of that nature. It's lower than that. What Kazakhstan has going for it is it's incredibly cost competitive, and so those are like C1 cash producers, and so the margins are still phenomenal. So as much as we would like to go and have like 100 meters at 1% copper, or even step out beyond that. We don't necessarily need that in Kazakhstan in this specific porphyry setting.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's what is it, 0.3, 0.4 or something like that that
Exactly.
you can make work from a mining perspective. Again, don't quote me on that, but that's kind of what, if I out of memory, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Um, Second best, what will be your second best target? That's the only thing you're drilling on the porphyry belt this year?
No, so we have 4 projects within the two porphyry belts. 3 of those are ours. One is with First Quantum. So the project that we are drilling that is ours is Saribastau, and then we will also be drilling the project that we have in partnership with First Quantum. Again, they're fully funding the drilling of that project. That's called Aktagai West. As a junior explorer, unsurprisingly, we named it based on the deposit that we're right next door to. So we're right on the edge of the Aktagai project. Aktagai is a 12 million ton contained copper camp, and again, it's doing around 250,000 tons of copper production annually across a multi-decade mine life. So, a tier one asset through and through. We are right on the flanks of that. The reason that we're there is that we had some Soviet era mag highs undercover on the edge of that deposit. And the thesis was, could they potentially be porphyry clusters, that are a continuation of this camp undercover? It hasn't been tested because that cover is there. We did a vector IP survey there last year. We had a moderate response on that, but a response that absolutely warrants drill testing. And we also had some Soviet era drilling that indicated sort of potential mineralization within those mag highs. So the goal this year is to go and do KGK drilling there again, punch into that horizon, and see if there's mineralization within it.
Same question as the other two parts of the country: topography, accessibility, local communities. How is that from that perspective?
So here we're closer to the second largest city in Kazakhstan, which is Almaty, which is a phenomenal kind of metropolitan city, a really cool part of the world. We're about 2 hours away to, say, our Saribastau project. We've got a major highway running through the middle of the project, alongside that, power lines to match. So again, super accessible. All of the porphyry projects are the same in that respect. And yeah, we're not talking sort of high Andes, we're not talking remote, and we're not talking sort of operating at fly camps. Again, the same applies, towns that we get to work out of, which is nice.
Hmm. From the government perspective, everything else is permitted. There's no major paperwork hurdles that you have to go through.
So bear in mind that we have some licenses which have been very recently granted. So obviously on those, we still work through the permitting process. But broadly, just to give you a sense of what that looks like, we lodge an application. Within 10 business days, we get a yes or a no on that. I think many other parts of the world would cry at how efficient that is. Like, it's phenomenal. It then takes us broadly between 3 to 6 months to get permits. During that period, you can still do certain work streams. So you can still do sort of certain non-intrusive work streams. What's beautiful about our permitting system is that once we've gone through that upfront, done that heavy lifting, it then covers the entirety of the exploration tenure. So we get 6 years plus a further 5 years if we want it, and we don't have to go back year on year to renew our permits or to kind of do different work streams. So really heavily front-ended, really efficient in that respect. Again, I think a lot of other parts of the world should probably look to mimic Kazakhstan when it comes to both licensing and permitting.
I've kind of been through this with Eris here, but worth touching upon nonetheless because it's a separate interview. But from the perspective of corruption, and stuff like that within the government, how does that work? What level have you experienced any level of corruption?
Short answer is no, absolutely not. Can I say that about other parts of Central Asia? Not that I've seen it firsthand, but the short answer is probably not. That's why we are in Kazakhstan. Again, it is the crown jewel of that part of the world. What it has going for it is this long history of being a resource-rich nation and foreign direct investment coming into the country, both by way of, the US, Europe, but also Russia and China. Clearly, a lot of capital from those parts of the world, given it shares a border, but it's kind of come from, each and every direction. What it massively has going for it now is that under the old code, it was like a contract-based system where you had to negotiate your licenses. Arguably, if there is scope for corruption, that's where it falls, right? Like when you are negotiating what your license looks like, what one license looks like for one group might be different for what it looks like for another group. Under the new modern code, so post 2018, all licenses are the same. So I get granted a license on the exact same terms as Rio Tinto, as Fortescue, as Glencore, as Tech, Aris and Tech, as First Quantum, as they've applied for it. So there isn't scope for that. There's no room for that. Likewise, the terms are set, they're defined, and they've mimicked WA. Um, Even under the old code, you've got a long history where security of tenure has always been strong and contract law has always been strong. And actually, that's only even become stronger in that they've set up a zone called the Astana International Financial Center, where you have like British judges that have come in and that like litigate and litigate various contracts and determine kind of various contracts disputes. So it's like they really genuinely are heading on the right direction. Where again, I think I've explored in many other parts of the world. I'm not saying that Kazakhstan is perfect. It's probably a bit too much bureaucracy for what I like, a bit too much paperwork. But if that means that we have security of tenure, we've got strong contract law, and we have a modern licensing system, I'll take that any day of the week.
Has organized crime dropped since 2018 and since those changes in bringing in the British and stuff? Like how was the situation with organized crime?
I couldn't really answer that because we don't really see it, right? Like it's not a day-to-day part. You don't think Kazakhstan and organized crime. Like I don't anyway. Again, we don't really come across that. So I don't know any crime stats because it's not a huge issue for us. So to be completely honest with you, I don't know. I
Hmm.
really don't know.
Uh, I think of Kazakhstan, and I think the idea that I have is one of safety. Is that how you feel like when you go into Astana? What's kind of the city that welcomes you?
Like you never feel unsafe in any part of the country, right? Like that's the beautiful reality. We're not operating in West Africa where that is a real concern, right? Like, you have not only safety concerns, but terrorism and plus, like insecurity of tenure as well. From a pure personal safety standpoint, wherever we go in Kazakhstan, we never feel unsafe. And again, that's a blessing. We don't take that for granted. It's phenomenal to be able to have that.
Yeah. I think maybe that's culturally related to Kazakhstan has a wonderful culture as far as I could tell based on what I've seen online, and that's probably something you're experiencing too. We um we didn't talk much about your what you call optionality here, which is Altai and Kulan, two separate companies again, as far as I understand it. What's just kind of a recap on what's happening there this year in one of your news releases, you talk about rare earths potential. What's happening there?
Yeah, so again, both portfolio companies, both of which we've incubated, both of which, have now taken on a life of their own. Within Altai, Pallas still owns 55% of Altai. And it was set up specifically to go and chase what's called magmatic copper and nickel sulfides. You will notice that I put the copper before the nickel there. That's pure marketing because everybody hates nickel. But these are as good copper targets as they are nickel targets, who our advisor Steve Beresford keeps reminding me of, and he's absolutely right. But polymetallic nickel copper sulfides. What we are chasing here is supergiant nickel copper systems. We are in a part of the world that overlaps the same super plume that hosts Norilsk. Norilsk is the single most valuable cluster of deposits globally. So it's a pretty nice North Star to be working towards. Um, it's the world's largest nickel producer, and it's kind of in the top 20 of copper producers as well. So again, a truly polymetallic operation. At a regional scale, at a camp scale, at a belt scale, sorry, at a regional scale, a belt scale, a camp scale, and even like a prospect scale now, we see analogs with Norilsk. I caveat that by saying that it's still early. We haven't drilled these projects, but suffice to say, we're pretty excited to go and get a drill rig over some of the targets that we have here. We're a first mover here. There's nobody else that's doing what we're doing within this belt. Why we're really excited about it is because within this Kazakh subset of it, anything that was not immediately outcropping was completely blind to the Soviets because we know that EM surveys, so electromagnetic surveys, which is kind of the first pass, no-brainer tool in modern nickel exploration, hasn't been done. So anything that was immediately kind of not outcropping was blind to them. So that's the opportunity here. I would say this is kind of Pallas, but maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years years ago, and we're trying to work it up the curve to the point where it kind of gets to a similar position. So again, the goal this year will be to do an EM survey across the whole portfolio, and then from there we hope to go and drill some of the conductors that we are likely to get from that program.
This year, you want to drill it?
It's TBD, to be entirely honest with you. So I think I would love to drill this year. I think rationally or more practically speaking, it's probably that we're doing the EM across most of it. If we have time to drill it, then we will. But I think realistically, that might be sort of 2026.
Right. And then you have the pegmatites there at Kulan, I guess.
That's right. So second portfolio company is Kulan. We set it up as a vehicle to go and chase pegmatite deposits. Initially, the thesis was that we would come and look at these as hard rock lithium pegmatite deposits. We're here because it's a past producing pegmatite belt. So you had Soviet era operations that had either tin tantalum operations with lithium sent to tailings because the Soviets didn't have a need for it, didn't know what to do with it. Or rare earth operations, again, where you had sort of lithium in the mix, but it wasn't sort of useful. There was no need for it. I'll caveat this part of the portfolio by saying that it is absolutely the most conceptual part of anything that we have within the portfolio. And the reason that I say that is because I can't point to a tier one lithium deposit in Kazakhstan. And to the best of my knowledge, I can't point to a tier one lithium deposit anywhere in Central Asia. So it's not to say that it can't be there. It's just that the work hasn't been done to prove that out. We're super early on this. We've quite literally only done sampling across about 50% of the pegmatites that we have outcropping. We did not hit economic lithium grades at surface, so we have more work to do there. A lot of that now is going to be a question of zonation. You can have pegmatites that are completely barren, and then you can have zones within those pegmatites that host all the mineralization. So we have more work to do there to kind of vector into that. What we did hit at surface was what we believe to potentially be economic beryllium grades. Beryllium is a super niche market. Interestingly, Kazakhstan is one of three parts of the world that produces beryllium. There is a plant up the road called the Uba metallurgical plant that Kazatomprom, that the world's largest uranium producer, own and operate. We are still figuring out what to make of that. We are not beryllium experts. And frankly speaking, the goal this year will be to go and do some shallow drilling to test both zonation still for spodumene and figure out what's going on with the beryllium.
That's an interesting part as well, kind of like maybe a little bit of a cherry on top, wild card too. I've absolutely no idea what happens or how you would go about it, but it's interesting to have it there, and I'm glad you touched upon it. You bring up a good point. I did want to ask you about Kazatomprom. Kazakhstan as a country is the largest producer of uranium. They produce almost half of the world's uranium. Kazatomprom stuff is mostly sandstone hosted, kind of roll front deposits. Fluvio sandstone, I believe, uranium kind of precipitated at redox fronts due to the interaction with the reducing agents like the organic matter, sulfites, and stuff like that. And I was wondering how come you don't have any of that? I mean, you have half the country, or well, no, you have a large chunk of the country essentially. How come no uranium prospectivity?
So just for context, the uranium actually sits off those world-class, uranium deposits that Kazatomprom own and operate through the in situ leaching, production method, sits off the edge of the basin, sort of in higher up stratigraphy that's kind of unconsolidated. So there is a little bit of overlap there. But look, the reason that we don't have any uranium is that it is the one commodity in Kazakhstan that's deemed strategic. What does that mean? It effectively means that Kazatomprom have a stranglehold on the market and they have full rights to it. And so effectively, under the law, you have the ability to explore for uranium. However, if you make a discovery, then there's a carve out, by way of it being a strategic mineral, whereby if you make a discovery, Kazatomprom can take it off your hands at cost, which I'd argue is not necessarily a win for an exploration company. And likewise, in order to put any kind of uranium production, any uranium project into production, you need to be in joint venture with Kazatomprom. So, for that reason, we haven't looked at uranium. Kazatomprom clearly have a huge amount of expertise in that space as well, whereas we don't. We are not uranium experts by any stretch of the imagination. And given the strategic nature, it hasn't been something that we've targeted.
Could some of the stratigraphic drilling that you're going to be doing at Chu-Sarysu come up with anything that says, hey, this and that might be uranium? And I mean, what's the realistic situation? Like if you find uranium, what happens to the whole project? What happens to the JV with Ivanhoe? How does that influence you?
Yeah, look, it is possible. Hopefully unlikely. And the reason being is that we are kind of operating in different stratigraphies. So what's known of where the copper is and the uranium is they are, again, different parts of the stratigraphy, albeit there is some interrelationship there. But again, for the most part, that's off the edge of the basin, which is not where we're necessarily looking from a copper standpoint. So I don't want to say that it's impossible, but hopefully it's not overly likely.
Right, right. Well, why I'm asking that is because I noticed in kind of in your language there, you're dealing with bleaching, so oxidized fluids, if you will. So that's why I also mentioned the roll front environment for
Yep.
uranium. That's why I'm
Yep.
thinking about it. But so essentially, that's something that like you would ideally stay away. Like ideally, you don't find uranium, which kind of it sounds counterintuitive
Counterintuitive.
to
Yeah,
think, but
but
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, like, as part of the targeting process as well, if there's any indications or sniff that that's there, like frankly speaking, then that's something that we stay well clear of.
yeah.
So it's a good question. It's a valid question. And look, again, it's not impossible. Um, but based on our understanding of things as it stands right now, it's hopefully unlikely.
Hmm. Simon, we're going to be coming up on 2 hours here, almost. I can keep talking for many more hours. I don't want to keep you on your entire weekend. So, what am I? Let's talk about what keeps you up. What keeps you up at night? I suppose there's lots to keep you up at night, but kind of from a geological perspective, company or country perspective, what do you think are the main challenges here?
From a From a geological perspective, I don't get kept up at night around any particular project hitting or missing. Like that's kind of why we're here. It's to take those stabs and I guess like we have such a big broad portfolio that I don't sit up at night and I'm like, oh gosh, if we don't hit on this drill hit on this particular project, it's game over for us.
Hmm.
Um, like all honesty, I think anything that like the biggest thing that keeps me up at night is probably safety. Like to be completely honest with you, I think like any CEO that is not concerned about making sure that their guys go home safe at the end of the day is probably lying to you. Like it's a prospect that over the last like 12 to 24 months we put a huge amount of work into. Just because I don't want to be responsible for anybody again going home in any other condition than sort of what they left for their job at the start of the day. So that's probably my biggest concern. And again, I think anybody that has any exposure to being in a leadership role with people in operations, I would hope they kind of share those concerns. We've put a lot into it over the last kind of 12, 24 months. So we've fortunately matured to be at a position where we can bring on board a HSE specialist that's come from an oil and gas background. And we also get to lean on the expertise that, again, our joint venture partners bring into that equation. There's no IP when it comes to safety, right? It's like share what you can across the board with everybody. And what's been quite cool is that there's been some openness to doing that as well with other groups that we're not partnered with in Kazakhstan as well. It's like, hey, let's share what we know here so that we make sure everyone goes home safe.
I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch of things to ask you here, and it's been a wonderful conversation, wide ranging. I'm hoping we can do this again soon. And for people listening, if I did forget something, which is highly likely, let me know. Put it in the comments, send me an email, whatever works. And Simon, yeah, will be looking forward to our next conversation. What do you think I forgot to ask you? What did you come here hoping to talk about that I failed to bring up?
Um, Is it worth touching on what we look like at a corporate level, fundraise, that side of the equation? Maybe just a super brief note on that.
Sure. How's that going? How's the yeah? Because you're raising capital right now. Yeah, talk to me about that.
Yeah, so just briefly, and look, laying cards on the table, a big reason that we want to start to get our story out there is because, as you spoke about before, this is the first long form interview that we've ever done, and I'd like to kind of try to change that side of the equation. But we're actively in the market for the first time in a little while now. The last raise that we did was about 2.5 years ago. Um, we're going out, we're sort of raising some capital so that we can now get way more aggressive on our own projects and kind of put use of proceeds into more drilling, giving ourselves a serious sort of 2 year runway, a couple of growth opportunities as well, which we'll probably throw into the mix. And again, just giving ourselves sort of that 2 year runway. So thankfully, that capital raise that we're doing right now has been well supported by existing shareholders. And likewise, there have been a few new names that are slowly but surely joining the register. We only kicked it off about a week and a half ago formally. So my goal, unsurprisingly, is to go and continue to try and build as strong a register as possible. And my job is also to go and talk to anybody that may be interested in backing us in doing what we want to do. So I know as a private company, we sometimes feel a little bit unapproachable, maybe. But what I would say is like our shareholder register looks and feels like a public company's shareholder register. And I'm always keen to talk to people in that respect. So if there's ever any interest in the audience there, please do not, be shy to reach out.
I'm thinking of that dumber meme that says, "So you're telling me there's a chance," which is actually making me happy here. Is there what does your share registry look like beyond what I mentioned and what I we had on screen at the beginning? Is it you say like so you have retail investors? How many investors do you think you have right now?
We've got 138 people in the shareholder register.
Wow.
So it's substantially larger than what a lot of people think. Again, we've worked really hard to bring on board, those shareholders, but Dan and I, so Daniel and I as co-founders are the largest shareholders. We then have a group that came in as a syndicate, all associated with the SAF group, so like a Canadian alternative investment fund manager. We have Rick Rule on the register. We have a syndicate that came in through Haywood, led by David Elliott, who is very similar to Rick, invested in and really probably propped up a lot of the junior exploration space in Canada. And then we actually have a few small institutional groups on the register, and then retail, ultra high net worth family offices, really kind of running the whole spectrum.
How are you finding the appetite? Again, if you get tired of my questions, just close your laptop and go.
No, no,
But
all
how are you
good.
finding the appetite for raising capital for a private exploration company? I think from a Canadian, where I'm asking this is from a Canadian perspective, people like to have that liquidity. There's a lot of
Yeah.
trading and reaction to news happening and so on. So, yeah, how are you finding the appetite for raising capital here?
Look, I think, again, I'm not going to lie to you and sit here and say that through prior rounds, raising capital was straightforward or easy. It definitely is it's an exclusive club of people that are willing to go and back a private group. Again, thankfully, we're kind of maturing to the point where there's a runway towards sort of probably moving down that liquidity path. But look, it's still a niche group of investors that will come into unlisted names. Thankfully, we've never had kind of a stronger catalyst to go and raise off by way of kind of the Ivanhoe deal, and also importantly, the amount of work that's now going to go in over the next couple of years. The rubber really is hitting the road. We have a lot of shots on goal, and I think whereas in previous rounds where we've had to be a little bit coy about things that we're working on, so be it joint venture deals that we know are coming in the pipeline, but we can't really verbally allude to. Here we can sit here and say, look, we've got a huge amount happening, and then there's also the other stuff that's happening behind the scenes as well. So there has been pretty strong momentum into this raise, which has been fantastic. But again, my goal is to build as strong a register as possible, and I'm always kind of keen to talk to people that might be interested.
All right, Simon, I'm actually letting you go now. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It's been fun. Thank you.
And as always, thanks to everyone for watching Resource Talks. I have a couple of more things to say, though. The fact that this company was interviewed here today does not mean that they're necessarily a good or a bad company. I'm not here to endorse nor attack anyone. I am simply here to ask some questions. If you find that I have failed in asking a question that you would have liked to hear an answer to, which will happen as I'm not an experienced interviewer, please let me know and I will try to correct that mistake in a future interview. As mentioned at the beginning, please understand that mineral exploration and development is an extremely risky business. Losing money is the norm and should be the expectation. This is a very complex sector, and the performance of individual companies typically depends on many different moving particles, including company-specific factors like geology, financing ability, and many others, really, as well as particles that are outside of the company's control, like geopolitics, macroeconomics, commodity prices, and many more, most of which are nearly impossible to fully understand. Moreover, these companies that typically get interviewed on Resource Talks are in the pre-revenue stage, which means they rely on the public markets for the financing of their operations, which could result in shareholder dilution. Furthermore, as a general rule of thumb, you'll be better off understanding that all company communications online, albeit this interview or their website and their presentation and their social media accounts, or even the social media accounts which you thought were your friends and then told you about a stock, everything really that these companies do is intended as marketing. And although I do not make buy or sell recommendations because there is a clear conflict of interest given the nature of my business, many out there do. And you should be aware of that inherent bias and you should be careful out there. That bias is not always going to be clearly disclosed with everyone out there. So it is safer for you anytime you're watching any type of company specific content to approach it with a dose of skepticism and assume that the party telling you about it is biased in at least some shape or form, because there will always be a bias. Again, albeit clear or not. So always ask yourself what the incentive of your counterparty is and never rely on them regardless of their incentives, but instead double check if what they're saying is true, again, by using setterplus.ca. The fact that I have no idea what I'm doing should already be clear to you at this point. I am not saying this to make jokes or laugh with myself. I just simply do not have a long enough track record of consistent investment profits. So I should, under no circumstances, be considered an authority on anything. Again, although this may sound amusing to you, believe me, it is not amusing and it is not intended as a joke. I'm simply pointing out a fact and warning you not to rely on anything I do or say. Unfortunately, at least to my understanding, nobody out there has any special abilities. The CEOs do not possess any superior knowledge, and they cannot know about what will go up, what will go down, or what will go in circles. Some people even believe that to be rule number one on Wall Street. Nobody really knows. None of us know whether any of the company's activities will result in a success, again, given that we're talking about high-risk activities where most of the times it ends in failure. Also, unfortunately, try as I may, I won't always catch all red flags or all challenges with the companies. So even if I did ask a few tough questions in here, don't rely on this being all of the tough questions. Again, these are complicated startups with many moving parts, and I am conflicted given the nature of this business. Therefore, I cannot guarantee the quality of anything presented in this video, and you cannot hold me responsible for any losses or damages stemming from the way you decide to use this interview. Viewers, listeners, and readers acknowledge and agree that the information presented herein did not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security or investment or to participate in any trading strategy. Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business strictly disclaim any and all liability for losses and or damages, whether direct, indirect, special, or consequential, or other consequences, however so caused, arising out of any use or reproduction of the content published by Resource Talks or any decision made or action taken in reliance upon it. By consuming this content, all consumers vow to release Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business from all claims, proceedings, or consequences. This is all to say, I know it's a lot of lawyer talk, but this is all to say that you shouldn't blindly trust me or anybody on the internet, and you should do your own research. If you don't understand everything in those documents, the chances of you losing money are even higher than they normally are in this space. And as mentioned earlier, the chances of even the best analysts in this sector losing money are extremely high, since this is venture capital and it is not for everybody. I'll leave you with one of Charlie Munger's quotes, which I wish I had listened to more often earlier on, which says, quote, "If you don't understand it, don't do it."